All right, we're going to go ahead and get started because I know we were running late for technical difficulties. Again, I just want to thank everyone for taking the time to join us today. I'm Councilwoman Crystal Orietta. I have the pleasure of representing District 7 on the County Council. And as of, I think, yesterday, I have the pleasure of serving as the Vice Chair for the Prince George's County Council. So one of the things we wanted to do, myself and Ashanti Martinez, who's going to introduce himself in a second, we wanted to create a space to have a town hall because we heard loud and clear the fears a lot from our residents about what was happening on the federal level, what was happening on the state level, what was happening on the local level, right? And how did all of these pieces work together? And so we wanted to create a town hall to have a conversation around the state of the budget, really high level, talk about our concerns, high level good things that are coming in the budget, issues that we might be facing. And so and then also create space for questions and create space to also hear about if there's any issues you want us to be championing. And if it can't happen in this budget cycle, it's a possibility for next budget cycle. So I will stop there and get my friend and colleague, Ashanti Martinez, an opportunity to introduce himself. Or excuse me,
Well,
Delegate Ashanti Martinez.
well, thank you so much, Vice Chair, Council Member Oriana. I'm just so incredibly proud to be able to serve with you and to be in this moment where we get to talk to our community about one of the most important things that we do, which is budget, which is take care of tax dollars. And it's so important that we have this conversation with you because it's your money. Right? That's what we're talking about. We're talking about how best to invest, how best to spend, and ultimately, here at the state, we have a huge task in trying to figure out how do we come home in the 90-day session with a balanced budget amongst all of the different storms that are among us and the priorities that we have right here in Prince George's County, making sure that we get our fair share of state resources as the number one priority for me and why I wanted to come and serve in Annapolis, because I felt for far too long we were not getting that fair share. And so I'm really, really excited to have this budget town hall to answer questions directly. At times, serving in Annapolis, it can feel like we're in a little bit of a bubble just because of the intensity of the work and the focus that's needed in order to get a good work product. But moments like this are really, really exciting. And so I look forward to all of your questions. There is no dumb question, there is no wrong question. Please ask it because I guarantee you someone else here on the call or someone else in the future watching this probably thought of the same thing. So if you don't ask it, you're doing yourself and your community an injustice. And so I want to make sure you get all your questions answered. But council member, back to you.
Thank you so much. And as questions come to you, just drop them in the chat. And so we'll have an opportunity to collect those questions and answer them at the end of the presentation. Next slide. Okay, I want to start off just with a high level understanding of the budget on the county side, right? When we talk about what the budget is here in Prince George's County, historically we're around the $5 billion range. But the reality is, and 5 billion, that's a lot of money, right? But when we look at DC's bill budget, which is around 20 billion, we look at Montgomery County, which is over 7 billion, we have a shortfall compared to our neighboring jurisdictions. There's just a reality. So sometimes we'll see resources and investments in DC and in Montgomery County, but the reality is that the funding in Prince George's County is a lot less than what we see in our neighboring jurisdictions. So I think it's just important to start us off with the understanding of the full summary of where we are in our budget and compare how we compare to other jurisdictions. Next slide. Here we'll look at a snapshot of our general fund revenue. I really wanted to show this slide because, again, when we look at from a naked eye perspective at our budget, we're going to see a constant growth, right? We saw 3 billion to 4 billion to 4.5, all the way now to $4.7 billion, right? And so when you look at that, you're like, okay, well, we're constantly have more revenue and more money, why are we not expanding in the programs that are offered? And I can show you why. Next slide. So we have the money, right? You saw we're talking about 4.7-ish billion dollars in our general fund. We're talking about a budget of a little over $5 billion total. And the question is, okay, where does the revenue come from? This is the issue because I saw a question in the chat. Why? Why do we have less money? This is the heart of the issue. When we look at where does our revenue come from? In the county, our revenue comes from income taxes and property taxes at a larger rate than any other revenue stream. And when you look at some of our neighboring jurisdictions, they have a lot more industry than we do. And so that's why we constantly have that conversation about property taxes and people saying, well, we have to raise taxes if we want to raise revenue, because for so long, the development of the county has led us to a bedroom community where we have a lot of housing, not industry when it comes to major industry, nor when it comes to entertainment industry compared to our neighboring jurisdictions. And so that has us heavily rely on income taxes and property taxes. And then you'll see a lot of money coming from the state, but that money is specifically for Board of Education, right? It cannot be spent on anything else. Next slide. Next, we have expenditures, right? So we have all this money. The number one question everyone wants to know is where's the money going, right? The lion's share of our resources goes to the Board of Education, right? And then it goes to public safety. And so that's 61% Board of Education, 20% public safety, and then you see that 19% for other government operations. And so when we say other, that's everything else, right? That is Department of Public Works and Transportation, that is DPI, that's 311, that is the county executive's office, the legislative branch, everything else falls into that area, right? It's why, for me, in my perspective, we are woefully underfunded when it comes to our social services and family services, the resources that we see in the county. It's because it's only 19% of the budget and it's spread across every single other thing we need. Okay, some people said they're not seeing anything on the screen. Hopefully that's not everyone. In the chat, let me know if you're not seeing the screen, just so I know if that's like maybe a one-person issue or multiple people. Okay, great. Other people are saying they can't see it. Next slide. Now we talked about why you see this constant revenue, but the idea is we're still in a deficit, right? I think we've all heard by now we have over 100 million right now. We're looking at $171 million deficit. And this is why. Even though our revenue is increasing, is still projected to increase, our expenditures are increasing at a higher rate. And so we're looking at a projected gap by FY 2030 of over $400 million. And so that is the issue, right? That we have a deficit and it is projected not to get better. And so we, not just on the county level, because I'm sure a Delegate Ashanti Martinez is going to talk about the issues on the state. So we're all trying to figure out how are we going to get revenue. Next slide. Why are expenditures increasing at such a high rate? Inflation and other outside factors are one of like the major reasons we see a lot of our costs rising. One of the key issues, a lot of people say, okay, well, how did we get here? Like, did we not see this coming? Like, how did we get so far off? And so I want to highlight some of the few, because I think it's a multifaceted issue, but some of the few key issues that brought us to where we are right now. One, I'll start with the P3, right? A lot of us have heard about the P3s, the Alternative Construction Financing Program that was going to allow us to build schools at a faster rate, because we knew we had so many schools that needed to be built and we really weren't able to turn them out at the rate we needed. And so the last administration, or I guess the current administration, put forward a P3 model, right? Which would be a public-private partnership And we knew it would cost more on the back end, right? Um, but the idea is that it would save us money on the front end. And what happened, and that we didn't find out until this past budget cycle, is that all of the, because think about like a mortgage, right? You buy a house and you have your mortgage payments, right? That's the simple way to think about what the P3 is. We're paying installments up to 40 years, and then we'll actually own the school building and they'll cover the maintenance. They never anticipated that that $40 million annually was going to come out of the operating budget. The first year, they told members and I think the school board member and council that it was going to come out of the CIP. But we were never projecting an annual expense of up to $40 million to pay for this. So that's the first issue. The next issue we're facing is the transfer and recreation tax, right? And that's when you talk about those taxes, that basically just means the income we get for selling and buying homes. And we all know what the interest rate has been like. And so it has not created a market where people wanted to buy and sell their homes. And so we are seeing a steady decrease in our transfer taxes that we weren't predicting to see. We also have a gap in our disparity grant. So we saw a huge influx of resources during the pandemic, both from the federal level and the state level. And it was that disparity grant is now evening out. So we're losing $12.4 million because it's going back to kind of normal. But that's going to be felt as well. Also, there's some issues and concerns about the blueprint, which I'm sure our delegate will talk about. So I'll leave that for him. And the last thing that is a possible impact. So the things I'm talking about on the top end is how we got here. What we're not even able to know is how bad is it going to get in the future, and possible loss of income tax due to Trump's layoffs and the amount of federal workers that are being laid off and how that's going to impact Prince George's County and contractors for the federal government. We can't even calculate what that is going to do to the revenue. Next slide. So I won't go too much into this because I want to make sure there's space for the delegate to talk about it. But I did also want to highlight some high level impacts from the state. So he might have updates from the last time we got briefed, but there's some changes of costs moving from the state to the county. So things like the amount that we pay for the teacher retirement fund, the how we contribute to the State Department of Assessments and Taxation, if they're going to delay or not delay the blueprint, right? So there's all these common denominators that we're not really sure how it's going to pan out that's going to impact the budget. And so they're the unknowns that's going to impact the budget. Next slide. So here are some high level cuts. Oh, there's a typo, so apologize for that. But there's some high level cuts that well, let me not say they're high level cuts that the administration sent down in their budget. So some of these things we're going to be actively advocating to put back in. But so there is a cut to the litter program. This is something that is on top of my list to see put back in the budget. But we're looking at close to $1 million cut in our litter program. But we know we actually really need to see more invested into the cleanup in our program, not less. The Clean Lot program and DOE, some stormwater programs, grants. So a lot of the funding to our nonprofits, decreases in Department of Social Services and Family Services, Department of Corrections, Public Works and Transportation, and our Housing and Community Development. So there's a lot of cuts to resources that will be felt that is in the proposed budget that came down from the county executive. Next slide. So one of the areas that did not see a cut is not impacted by the hiring freeze is public safety. So there are new recruits for fire and safety with fire and EMS, excuse me, at 95. Our police department, there's supports for over 110 new recruits, and also an investment in the sheriff and state's attorney. Next slide. We have some highlights for some of the investments for CIP. Some of this is, in particular to District 7 around the Blue Line corridor and infrastructure, Addison Park senior housing, some investment in the stormwater management, the Central Avenue Connector Trail. So there are some long-standing projects that a lot of people know have been in the queue that aren't going to be impacted. So there are some positive things that we're saying that are still in the budget. Next slide. Also the District 7 CIP summary from Park and Planning. So every single councilmatic district will have a slide that looks like this that will outline all of the different projects that are in the queue. We're seeing a over $15 million investment, which is great for us. As many know, when I first got in this seat, it was $0. So seeing that constant influx of resources specifically coming into District 7 is definitely a win. Next slide. And then we have a slide here, and we'll drop the link if people want to see the budget in full. It is a huge read. So there's a lot in the budget that we weren't able to go over, but I tried to focus on the areas where I've gotten either the most calls or most concerns, or I know are some of the more alarming issues that we're concerned about. We'll go through more questions, but keep on putting them in the chat. But I want to pause now to turn it over to Delegate Ashanti Martinez to give us an update of where we are on the state budget. Delegate?
Absolutely. Thank you, council member. One second. I'm about to share my screen.
Can we unshare ours so he can share his?
Let's see. Can folks see the screen?
Yeah, we can see it.
Okay. One second. There's like so many things on my screen. Okay, here we go. Here we go. Alrighty, so the state of the budget town hall. This is going to be the state budget portion. I want to preface this conversation with the disclaimer. I do not serve on the Appropriations Committee nor the Ways and Means Committee. That's the Spend Committee and then the Revenues Committee. I serve on the Health and Government Operations Committee. So I've done as much homework as I can to prepare and want to answer questions as much as possible. If there's something that I cannot answer, I will tell you I cannot answer, but I'm dedicated to getting you an answer. And so if you could give me your email, I'll make sure myself or my staff gets you an answer to your question. And this is being recorded. And so I'll have a copy of that recording to make sure I get back to you. So I just want to let folks know there is no dodging questions or things of accountability. We will get you an answer. I'm just not as well versed in this budget. And part of that is because it's a very large budget. This year's budget that we just passed out of the House of Delegates, as well as the BRFA, which is the revenue package that we pass along with the budget, is about $67 billion. That's what our budget is. And it generates about 1.3 billion in revenues. And we make 1.6 billion in spending cuts. You might ask yourself why? Why are we making so many cuts in spending at a time where we should be investing more in our people, right? When we have a Washington who is so hell-bent on causing chaos and confusion, we need our states to step up. We came into this session with a $3 billion deficit. You might ask how? We have so much money. We're one of the wealthiest states. How do we get here? This is something that was long coming. This was something that we knew and projected was going to be here. What we did not project or see coming was COVID. And you might question, why is COVID what kind of prevented this from coming on? Because when COVID happened, what happened with it? An influx of money from the federal level that paused us from having this much larger structural deficit. So the influx of COVID cash is what saved the last governor from having to make hard decisions and tough choices around our budget to make the investments that we know are needed. And so he was able to sail through the last few years of his term, Governor Larry Hogan, into saying that he was able to give us a cash surplus. What happened? What happened was what we knew was going to happen. The cash was going to dry up. As our expenditures have grown, our economy has not. Maryland's economy, I think, as a state, has grown about 3% year on average. We have not been a goods and services economy. We're just a services economy. And part of the reason why we need to modernize our tax code, which is what we did in this budget, part of the reason why we're making investments in things like the blueprint, so we have a workforce that could go into these sector service jobs and be able to provide high level services to not just our state and the region and the country, but the world, is because we know the realities that we face as a state. And if we want to win the decade, we need to make sure that we're making investments in our people that helps them meet that moment. And so one of the things that this budget does is it does put a 3% IT tax that generates about $500 million. Taxing IT services, like I said, helps us modernize our code because we've shifted from a goods-based economy to a service-based economy, and a lot of those services have moved online. So we want to make sure we're capitalizing on that, just like states like Texas and Ohio, and even Washington, D.C. already do. This is not something pie out of the sky. This is not something that is not done in other places. This is a best practice that we're now bringing to Maryland to make sure that we're getting our fair share from our businesses. One of the things that we also did that I think is really important because of the instability in Washington is that we made sure that while we're making cuts, at the same time, the revenues that we're generating give us a healthy cash surplus in our rainy day fund. We're going to be able to comfortably say that we have about 358 million in our cash balance once the state balances out. And you ask yourself, how do we do that? We do that a few ways. So the IT tax, like I said, gets us about $500 million in new revenues, which is big. One of the other things I was really proud of is that we raised the tax rate on individuals earning more than $500,000. I think that's reasonable. I think if you're making over $500,000 a year, you should pay a little bit more to make sure that everyone in our state has what they need. And so their tax rate went up from 5.75 to 6.25%. If you make above $1 million a year, it went from 5.75 to 6.5. And then we also made sure that we increased the sales tax on cannabis. So cannabis has been extremely successful. Once we legalized it, we've been getting a lot of revenues. And part of that is because we had a very low tax rate. We allowed and incentivized folks to come in so that we could get rid of the illegal market. We didn't want people to not purchase cannabis that were already purchasing it from the legal market. We wanted them to come into the stores and generate tax dollars. So we increased the sales tax from 9% to 12% to make sure that we're generating more revenue from there. We also increased the tax on sports betting from 15% to 20%. And then we also tinkered with the, oh, I'm going to move the slides in a second. I noticed I did not move slides. I just want to give you guys a quick overview before I move some of the slides. So we also did a change in increasing the standard deductions for individuals who claim their taxes. And so we wanted to make sure that we, again, modernized our tax code and allowed it to be fair and equitable. And so part of the reason why we had to do this is because, unlike the federal government, we can't print our own money. We have to leave with a balanced budget. That is our constitutional obligation here in the state of Maryland. And so what we had to do was be fiscally responsible and make sure that we provided stability for our state. We already discussed the rocky times that are happening. We want to make sure that we're investing and having the money necessary for Maryland. And so what that looks like, it looks like cutting $2 billion in future spending. What does that mean? We got rid of the pens or the positions that were not filled in state government. There are about 212 positions that we got rid of that saved us millions, hundreds of millions of dollars that we had to make. That's a hard decision, right? We want to make sure that whatever agencies that we have out there have the staffing capacity to deliver the services. But we also have to have a balanced budget. And so I'd much rather cut the empty seats than education or healthcare or transportation funding. That's the decisions that we have to make. And so, although these are hard decisions, they're what you send us up here for. One of my colleagues today in the debate said, "You don't send us up here to warm seats." And that's exactly right. We are sent here to make really tough decisions, decisions that we don't always want to make, but sometimes are necessary. Generating revenue is something we have to do as a state. Part of generating revenue is having an economy that people want to invest in. Part of that is having a people want to invest in. That's why I'm so dedicated to the blueprint. We are not going to get these large corporations to invest here in our state, businesses to really grow and flourish, people to open up their own businesses if we do not have an educated community. Maryland has one of the most educated states in the country in terms of degrees, and we need to make sure that is still the case. And so investing in our children is one of the number one things that businesses look at when they look at investment is our education system. And so I'm really, really proud that we have, as the House, dedicated ourselves to keeping and sustaining Blueprint. I will say the reason I say as the House is because we are a bicameral legislature. The Senate still has to do their thing with the budget. We have agreed on a framework that we're all working with, but there's some things that we did here in the House that might not pan out in the Senate. And so we have what's called a conference committee when they come together and we figure out the details. So we are very much not done with the budget yet. We still have about 13 days left of legislative session, but we will have a final product before we adjourn sine die. So back to generating revenues. Part of the generation of revenues is that increase of the taxing IT services. We also wanted to make sure that we increased our revenues when it came to transportation. We know that our roadways are heavily used. So many Marylanders are always on our roads. We also know many of those Marylanders are switching from gas-powered cars to electric cars. And so the gas tax is not producing at the rate in which we thought to keep up with a lot of the transportation needs. You also had previous administrations, I'll go back to it, Governor Hogan, and the mismanagement of the Purple Line. That was supposed to be a $2 billion project. That project is in my district, and I'll be the first to tell you it is a boondoggle. Let me tell you, that project should not be what it's going to be, which is going to be 10 to 11 billion. The original projection was $2 billion. I'm really appreciative that my colleagues here in Annapolis and the current administration has not only got a handle of it, but is also committed to it seeing to finish because my community is still in the middle of being a construction zone. But the reality is that project shouldn't have been so expensive. But because of poor management, we've had to spend a lot more than what we needed to. And so making sure that we can meet the moment, there is an excise tax hike on title fees and other measures when it comes to purchasing vehicles that folks will see. Investing in key priorities. This is the real key here because I think sometimes people see the number in terms of what they might have to pay or communities might have to pay in taxes, but what are those tax dollars going to? What are we actually funding? A large portion of that are our public schools. You saw the council members' breakdown of the budget and the millions of dollars that we got in revenues as a county from outside sources. Those outside sources are a combination of both state and federal dollars. And so as a state, we make a commitment through the blueprint that we are going to fund education. We're going to fund teachers. We're going to fund collaborative time. We're going to fund community schools. We are going to make sure that our children, who I think are our best blessing, get the best shot and opportunity that they need. I grew up in the county. I'm a son of the county. One of the things I tell people all the time is not that we don't have the ability here in Prince George's. A lot of times it's that we don't have the access or opportunity. How do we get access and opportunity? It's through investment. And so 122 million of those dollars that we collect here at the state are going right back to the local communities. One of the things that the Trump administration did that has been really catastrophic around research has been canceling grants. You know, him and Elon Musk every day just wake up and decide how they're going to cause terror on the American people. And one of the things that they did was they closed down a cancer research center here in our state that was funded through NIH. One of the things that we were able to do is that we're investing $15 million in cancer research to make sure that they can continue to do their work and to continue to have the ability to make a difference. One of my colleagues today on the floor from Baltimore City got up to talk about their research and to talk about their work because his mother was a patient that was receiving treatments at that facility. we have to continue, like I said before, to invest in our people, and we do that through investing in cancer research. Another 11 million is being invested in victims of crime grants. We know with every crime there's a victim, and we got to make sure that we are focused on making sure that they have the resources to rehabilitate their lives. That's in the budget. And we also have $15 million. I think they put Sunny Day Fund, but we are making investments in our future. Another one of those investments that I'm really proud of, because it impacts Prince George's County in particular, is the $27 million that they're investing in quantum computing. Um, there's a quantum computing center right in my district that is making really big strides. And when we
Do
talk
you know
about
how to
our
travel these roads?
when we talk about our economy here in Maryland being services based, this is part of that. It's investing in these new technologies, these new services that are going to be there. We are not California. We don't have Hollywood. We don't have a Silicon Valley, but that doesn't mean we cannot make strategic investments to bring industry here. We have more aerospace companies than anywhere else in the country located here in our state. It's time we start really investing in quantum computing and aerospace. NASA is here right in my district, NASA Goddard, a research center that does a lot of work with those aerospace folks. There's a consortium of businesses that are here that work together. We've got to be more targeted in how we invest and uplift them and the work that they do, because there's so many other ancillary businesses and consultants that also work in those spaces as well that are Marylanders that deserve investment. And so that's what we are really focused on doing, even with the $136 million for economic growth. And then our budget plan is really simple. I'll state it again. We've had to make really hard cuts in spending. Programs like Project Open Space, we had to cut. We had to cut the pens for state employees. That's a huge thing that is going to, disrupt how the administration is able to administer some services. We made sure they had what they needed, but as they wanted to grow out certain things, they're going to have to be a little bit more measured. But we did find the way to bring in more revenues, and that was a large part of the conversation, was how could we do that without having huge increases on folks' taxes. Let me tell you, 94%, I want to make sure I'm saying this right, my notes. Yeah, nearly 94% of Marylanders will receive either a tax break or no change at all in their taxes because of the revenue package that we were able to come with. And a large part of that is those IT tax on services. You might remember in the beginning of the year when the governor dropped his budget, because the way the budget process works, similar to the county, is that the executive gives us his budget. That budget had over $400 million in cuts to disability services. That was a drastic cut. And we were able to work with the DDA community, work with the administration and the Appropriations Committee's subcommittee on Health and Human Services that works very closely with my committee, the Health and Government Operations Committee, restored about 180 million of the DDA services. That's going to our most needy disabled people and their families to make sure that they can operate and live here in the state of Maryland. And then one of the things I said I'm really proud of is we made sure that we fully funded Brew Plan. We fully funded our teacher collaboration time. We fully funded our community schools. We fully funded the investments that we know we need to make in our students. And so one of the other things that we did have to do is look at healthcare and look at healthcare funding, particularly our Medicaid spend over the years. It has been quite high. Part of the rise in Medicaid spend is because we have gotten more people on the rolls. We've gotten and expanded programs and opportunities because during COVID, I think what we understood was there's so many determinants of health. There's so many things that can impact your health outcomes. And so as a state, we really wanted to invest to make sure that the weakest among us, the ones that are most vulnerable, had every opportunity and access that we can. We have more people insured now here in Maryland than we ever had before. I think we have an uninsured rate of a little under 6%. A lot of other states can't say that. And that's because of the work that we did to expand Medicaid and make sure that folks had access. And so while we did make cuts, we made sure that essential services still stayed the same. And then this is the last slide, because this is one of the more important ones. we have a lot of work to do on making sure that we sustain our environment and our climate. A lot of what we talk about doesn't matter if the world around us isn't healthy and good and sustained and available for us to grow and just be healthy people and healthy communities. That matters to so many of us. We're still making those investments. One of those investments I'm really particularly proud of is our investment in solar. We need to start creating and generating our own energy here in Maryland. A lot of the issues when it comes to energy prices are layered, but one of the problems is that we don't generate our own energy in Maryland. And how can we do that in a way that's sustainable, that doesn't push us back to fossil fuels, is something that we all should be focused on. And so the investments in the budget help us get there. And so now this is the end of my presentation, and I'm open for questions with
Thank
council.
you so much. So we're gonna do questions. So I saw a lot of people putting questions in the chat, so thank you for that. And then if people do want to come off mute and ask their question, we're asking them to raise their hand so we can, not be jumping off over each other, and so we can call on your name. If you feel more comfortable putting your question in the chat, we could do it that way as well. Before I start on the questions, there were two things that I just wanted to echo that Delegate Ashanti Martinez spoke about that I think is so crucial. One, he talked about kind of that the issue we're having with some of our funding around infrastructure and like increased costs due to either mismanagement or delays. And so we're also feeling that on the local level. So for a great example is the project for the new Suitland High School. And so we are delayed, and we're well over what I think a lot of us think it should cost to build a high school. We're talking about $300 million. Now, yes, it's going to be a crown jewel. It's going to be probably one of the best performing art schools, hopefully, I think in the state and region. But the reality was that there was a 588-day delay from DPI, from a county agency that cost that project millions and millions of dollars, right? And so management of how we spend our CIP and how we do these infrastructure projects, I just wanted to just echo what Ashanti mentioned there. And then the second point, when he talked about the investment in quantum computing, and we talked about a lot about tech and data centers has been at the top of conversations. It is also being had right here in Prince George's County with the EDC, the Economic Development Corporation. They've been investing a lot of time with figuring out how can we bring these industries to the county. So there's collaboration on what we're seeing on the state and how that's going to impact us here right in Prince George's County. So those are just two things that I wanted
I
to.
just also wanted to
Yeah.
mention, just
Mhm.
because I know a lot of us talk about Trump and the impact, but we just had our board of revenue estimates meet, and they project we're going to lose about $600 million as a state because of the actions of this administration. So that's combined through loss of income tax, that's combined through loss of investments of, projects that were supposed to come, you know, I think both of the two new agencies that were supposed to come in Prince George's are no longer coming. The Bureau of Engraving and the FBI project both were, shot down. So there's a lot of attacks on Maryland in particular that are impacting how our budgets are having to be developed as well, that I want to make sure people are aware of.
No, thank you for that point. And just the idea of the impact of the free and reduced meal program, just for Prince George's County, if that's cut, we're talking about $60 million. $60 million, and that's just Prince George's County, just for that one program. So to the point Ashanti made, what we're seeing on the federal level has a huge impact on what's going to happen here in the county. So I'm going to start us off with questions in the chat. I'll find the first question here. any additional spending on programs. So I can say that there weren't just cuts, right? So the budget, we're seeing areas where there's an increase, areas where things stay the same, and areas where things are cut. So that's since the budget's so extensive, it's hard to go line by line. So that's why tried to keep it high level. But for example, public safety across the board saw an increase in resources, and it's mostly the investment in like social services and family services where you're traditionally going to see a lot of cuts. And so that's what we're seeing from a program perspective. Um, there was also a question about uh, the long debate around the P3s and how it could be a surprise, the $40 million price tag in the operating budget. Then I saw another question about um, basically if it was supposed to be spent at the same time coming out of CIP or the operating, what's the difference? So that's a great question. So the way it works is that you can't cross mingle funds. So if something is coming out of our CIP budget, we can't then just move it over into our operating budget. And a lot of the things that come out of our CIP budget, we're talking about bonds, things that are financed in different ways. A lot of times the cash is like maybe what's it called, pay-go, or different things where we're actually gonna have to pay a lot of cash up front. And so that's the main concern about it coming out of the operating budget versus coming out of the CIP budget, is that we can't just move the funds around in that way. And next, there was a question about um, is this because we're stopped building townhomes? I would say no. What we're seeing when it comes to revenue has nothing to do with the development of townhome or residential. It's actually the opposite. A lot of the reason why we're in the situation we are in Prince George's County specifically is because we're a bedroom community, because we've spent so much time developing only residential. And we do not have the industry and infrastructure because yes, when we build housing, we're still going to make more revenue. But the issue is that revenue is still tied to property taxes and income taxes, right? Without being tied to industry. And so if you want to increase the revenue, you have to increase people's property taxes, right? And then if we have what we're seeing on the federal level with all these job cuts, then that's going to also impact our income taxes. And so it is good to have a balance, but the problem is it's very unbalanced, is that our revenue is really tied to development. And Ashanti, I want to give you space if you wanted to say anything to those questions too.
Yeah, I think to the point that you just made, before the pandemic, I think park and planning said a little over 60% of the folks who worked in our county left the county every day to go to work. That has huge impacts on our revenues and what we're able to build as industry and who we're able to bring here. I know a lot of times people ask, like, why don't we have certain retail or certain restaurants? Well, you can't have a restaurant if you don't have a lunchtime rush, right? You can't bring certain things if the people are not there to come. And so I think because of COVID, it has switched where a lot of people were working from home. I know with this administration, a large portion of the folks who do still have jobs are now being asked to come back in on a more permanent basis. And so that I think has some time to settle to figure out what the full impacts of that is going to be. But ultimately, if we want to be competitive here in the county, with our revenues, we need to make sure that businesses want to come here. And we have to figure out ways to incentivize that or look towards new industries like what the council member mentioned on, the AI computing and looking at the data centers and figuring out if that's the way forward. I know Northern Virginia has done that. I know for us already as a state, we're looking at the quantum computing and making a strategic investment in that industry because one, it was developed at the University of Maryland. We want it to stay here in Prince George's County, but we also want to make sure that the folks who did this want to stay here and invest here and continue to grow here, because everybody wants to bring them in. And so I think, to the council member's point, it's a balance, and figuring out what that balance is a really difficult task.
Exactly. I did see some more questions. I'm jumping around here to make sure I answer different topics. There was a question about the telecommunication tax increase. Um, so where we are with that, the administration, meaning the county executive, sent down a tax that we were granted the authority to do on the state level around raising our telecommunications tax.
I voted against it. I just want to say, for the record, I did
Thank
not
you,
like that
Ashanti.
new tax. I voted against it last year.
Um,
One of like three people.
exactly. And I'm the one person that so far has voted against the telecommunication tax because it just came through committee. So I did not support it. We're looking at, is it 250 or 350? I think two
I want to say 250.
it's 250 per cell phone. So if you have a family plan and a lot of phones, you'll be more impacted. But it's 250 per phone on your monthly bill. So that is a telecommunications tax that is being discussed right now. It's just passed through committee, but it hasn't been voted by the council as a whole yet. But I will say that that is reflected in the budget, right? And so they reflected the money before it was voted on. And so that is also another issue or thing we'll have to work out um, as we negotiate the budget. But they originally, one of my concerns also with supporting the telecommunication tax is when they asked for support from the council, they promised that it would be also used to help supplement the senior tax credit. And that's not the case. They have not put the senior tax credit in the budget. They're asking for the senior tax credit to be delayed a few years. And so that was one of my concerns is that it was promised as a trade-off to, be a resource and a relief for residents, but that's not what it is right now. I don't see any hands raised to come off mute, so I apologize if someone did raise their hand and I'm missing it. I didn't see it, so I'm still in the chat. And if my office can let me know if I'm missing it, and need to call someone's name, just let me know.
There are two hands.
There are two hands. Can you call the name? Because I can't see it.
The first name is Melissa.
Hi, Melissa, you want to come off mute and ask a question?
I have a question about the state budget. Did you want to finish up? Did you want to do the
No,
county
you can go back
first?
and forth. So
Mhm.
people feel free, anyone, to
Okay,
ask
I
state
just had
and county
a
questions.
quick question.
It's
Sorry
going
to see
out
that.
So
to
you're breaking
me.
up.
Sorry. Oh, sorry. I think I don't have very good Wi-Fi here. Might be better here. So I just want to say, first of all, congratulations, Vice Chair Oriata. Happy to see that. So I had a question for Delegate Martinez. What you said about the state, my understanding is they're still negotiating. So the things that you presented, is that what particularly the House is? I mean, I assume the House and probably, like, I'm sure Alonzo Washington and some very big Blueprint supporters are in there, but that's the state budget is not final, correct?
Is not, no. So what I presented is what House Democrats did and what we passed on to the Senate today. Like, for example, we have agreed with the Senate and the governor's office on a framework in terms of the numbers and what the big kind of revenue number was going to be, what the cuts were going to be, and we have agreed on that. The details of how we fully get there are going to be a little different. Like, for example, the Senate president has made it very clear that he doesn't support combined reporting for corporations. That is part of how we get to the additional revenues in this budget. I don't know if they're fully going to do the tax on capital gains like we did in ours. So there's a couple things of that nature that are going to be a little different, but ultimately it is still a working document. It is still something that you want to pay attention to.
Okay, next we have Barry.
Bear, if you're still on, you can come off mute and ask your question. All right. If you're having technical difficulties, please put it in the chat and we'll do our best to answer it. The next question is for you, Ashanti, around is the state looking to increase
Yeah. Can you hear
revenue?
me now, Councilwoman?
Yes, we can hear you now.
I'm sorry. I'm sorry. I was technically challenged.
No
Um,
worries.
First of all, I'd like to thank you both for having this town hall. You know, it's very, very much needed. And Delegate Martinez, I heard you speak earlier about community schooling, and I can't stress just how important that is in so many ways. I'm glad that you guys are concentrating on that because it is a vehicle that will help not only our youth, but it helps the adults that help the youth
Yep.
in the county. And I was privy to sitting in a meeting in the District of Columbia a couple of weeks ago, and the mayor actually discontinued community schooling and elected to go some other way. And I think she's going to probably regret that. But um, also, I wanted to mention that it can be used in bringing the building trades back in play. Not every kid in this county is going to college. It's very important that they are able to uh, get and build on a sustaining income that's going to, you know, sustain them for the rest of their lives. So community schooling could be a huge part to that. And with all the construction industry coming in the county, I think it should be mandated that a certain amount of county residents have those jobs because I look at those jobs today and, no offense, but I barely find uh, folks that speak English doing it. So I know they can't, it's not uh, a a good amount of county residents doing those jobs. So I just want to congratulate you on that.
Well, thank you so much, Barry. Look, we are very much aligned. So you were singing my language in terms of support for community schools, support for what I think are project labor agreements to make sure that we are hiring locally for these big projects where we're spending your money, your tax dollars to invest in infrastructure. We need to make sure our neighbors are building those projects. And I think we also need to increase the opportunities for our young folks to learn about these different pathways in their career. Not everyone is going to go to college, and that is okay. There are places where you can still be productive and pathways for you to thrive. And I think we need to make sure that folks are given every opportunity God given to be successful. And that is by providing more access. And so community schools do that. I'm a product of our school system. I graduated from Parkdale High School. And so I know the amazing things that we can do here in Prince George's County and the millions of examples that we have of people making a difference every single day. And so I'm just really, really excited that in this budget, we were able to sustain our values.
No, I'll just echo that sentiment around, especially making sure that we hire residents that live in Prince George's County, because there's so much opportunity, and this is our money, right? We talk about investing in building schools, roads. How do we ensure that those jobs are our young people? And so that connection with making sure the trades are intertwined with our school system, making sure that we have a standard around project labor agreements. Ashanti and I are both labor supporters and understand that having access to a living wage, healthcare, and creating those standards, it's really how you create a middle class. And so I just want to echo that's so important, and we're both huge supporters of that. And so we had some claps for the PLAs, Ashanti, in the chat. Um, okay, also I'll move on to the next question. One question was about the revenue streams outside of taxes that the state is looking at. Are there other revenue sources that you want to highlight outside of taxes that you've heard discussed?
So the other places where I guess we would get support for our expenditures would be through the federal government. But we know that their funding right now is not as reliable. A large portion of federal funding that we do get is for education, but also for healthcare. And so one of the things that we were really worried about with this last budget CR in the Congress having to be pushed, luckily they sustained funding. I think what is going to happen potentially is that the share for Medicaid is going to be, instead of being 90-10, where the federal government pays 90%, the states pay 10, might be shifted a little bit, either really extreme to a 50-50 or to a 60-40. Any shift in that at all will require the state to cough up millions of dollars. And so we're trying our very best to just keep ourselves afloat with what we do have in terms of responsibilities. But the only way we can generate revenues, from my understanding, again, I don't serve on Ways and Means, but from my understanding, is through economic growth, is through taxes.
Thank you for that. We also had a question. Sorry, I lost it now. It was a question about the development, and was it short-sighted to develop more residential than commercial? And how do we move forward with building more commercial and industry? I agree that it was short-sighted. I know this is something Delegate Ashanti Martinez and myself agree that we just lacked the balance when it came to development. And so it's three things that we need to focus on, right? We one know there is also an issue with the amount of housing, right, and demand. That's a reality, right? So neither of us are going to say stop 100% development of residential because we're at capacity, right? No one's saying that. And there's a reality of that. When industry looks to come in, they're also looking at the number of rooftops, they're looking at disposable income to make those decisions. So both of us are highly aware that that's an important factor to bring retail. But the issue is, if you, especially around our transit-oriented development spaces, right? If we don't leave space for commercial to develop, where will it go, right? If we put up residential without making sure we're carving out space for commercial, and in the zoning rewrite before my time, we moved from, like, there was a concept around mixed development, right? Where there was kind of like this mandate to have kind of like the Woodmores and I'm trying to think of another good example, maybe also the Harbor, right? Where you have retail, restaurants, housing, all in one area, right? And now we don't have the mixed use development. We have what we call CGO zones, right? That basically just means you can have either or, not necessarily have to have both, right? So we were trying to move towards this direction of creating these kind of ecosystems where it was a walkable community of residential to restaurants and nightlife or coffee shops and grocery stores. But now you can have one plot of land and say, okay, I'll do commercial or I'll do residential or I'll put a self-storage unit there, right? It was all of these wide range of options that you could put in an area. And what a developer is going to do, they're going to put what makes the most sense, what's going to pencil out for them. And so we saw a lot of self-storage facilities popping up. I know that was a big thing in my district and in some places around the county because it was low cost, high return. And so that kind of goes back to that conversation around development and the importance of what our zoning looks like, what we say can be built where, and decisions we make. Because a lot of times we won't see the consequences of those decisions for decades to come, right? And we are basically living out the consequences of decisions well before both of us had the opportunity to serve in these positions. Before I move on to a question in the chat, is there someone else with their hand raised?
Yes, we have Tanya.
Tanya, you can come off mute.
Can you hear me?
We can hear you.
Okay, thank you.
You're
And
welcome.
thank you for holding the town hall. I have a couple questions. I wanted to know from the county council's budget, can you share with us what is the operating cost per council member and any increases that may have impacted the budget over the last 3 or 4 years, coming up on 4 years? And you had mentioned about the CIP. And so the CIP that you mentioned, we're talking about the school CIP, correct?
Correct.
Okay, so the question I wanted to know is how is that impacting our county budget? Now, my understanding was the CIP, the majority of that money is coming directly from the state, and that is dispersed to the schools. And the other question was, I remember the school system when they were doing the P3 that I think it's Deputy Director Washington had told the public, even though the money had to come out of the operating budget, that on the back end, that money would eventually go over from the CIP budget to pay this school system back. So it was going to be a wash. So there wouldn't be any loss with that money. So I'm trying to figure out how does that impact our county expenditures, because that's money that's already allocated.
Right. So I'll start, I think I'll work my way backwards. And then if I forget something, I'll ask.
Okay, thank you.
So yeah, and I'm not sure when you had the conversation about the impact for the cost specifically for the P3, right? Because this is an outlier from how school construction usually is, right? It usually would not impact us, and you're right in the sense that funding comes down from the state. But the issue, and that was the way it was explained at first when we did the P3. But this last budget cycle, we found out for the first time that it needed to come out of the operating budget, and that the county, so the school board asked the county to pay a portion of it. And so that's how it's impacting us. It's coming out of our budget, and we won't be made whole from it. And so I don't know if you all remember the issue we had about there was an over and above revenue that the school system got from a tax. And it was never calculated in their budget. It was something additional that they got. And the superintendent house did a presentation about it when our then county executive asked the state to change it so that we could use that money officially to pay towards the school system and have it included in the amount that we pay them, right? Not an over and beyond, but a funding that we could use to pay them in our I'm trying to think of the word, maintenance of effort, right? We have the ability to pay them out of that fund. And so he talked to the state about how that was going to cost the school system a reduction in $60 million. And we're feeling that. And so the issue is that that money we moved, right? I'll say the administration advocated to move it to pay for this. Myself and some of my colleagues didn't agree that that was the best course of action because it would have consequences to services, because it's money that the school system had always received. And so it would impact services, to use that to supplant other funding that was really needed to be paid to the school system from a different avenue. So that's where we are there. It just is going to cost us money. And so I can make sure we share links where the school system was before us in the education workforce development. And we asked those questions directly to the administration, and they told us it's going to cost us. And Stanley, who's our amazing director of OMB for the county, also made it clear that this is just something we're going to have to pay for the foreseeable future for the next 40 years. That was not something expected. The next thing about each of the council's budgets and impacts. Historically, it stayed the same. So each council member has about a $500,000 budget. It pays for all of our staffing, um, all of the things, sponsorships or things you want to do in the community. So our individual office budgets are pretty much set. We haven't really seen a huge increase in our office budgets. And the council ourselves, we are the cheapest of all of the branches and departments when it comes to our budget. We are very small in comparison to any of the other departments or agencies in the county. Thank you for your question. Any other hands raised before I move back to the chat?
Yes, next we have Jonathan.
Good evening, folks. Jonathan Santana, local resident business owner and board member for the Hispanic Chamber of Commerce, Prince George's County. I want to thank you for setting up this event. This is sort of last minute. I actually just saw the email notification today, so I signed up right away. Anyhow, I wanted to bring up two things. The number one, I know that Mr. Barry was mentioning earlier that just the trades and everything. I'm really a big advocate for that, for trades, especially like here within the county, making sure that people have access to those things. So I wanted to ask Delegate Martinez what is the state going? You and Council Member Oriata mentioned the budgets and the support that's being provided for the school system, but what about for the trades? Let's say community college are offering the courses or the classes through PGCC or whatever other county community colleges are out there. And I was wondering what the state's going to do to support that. And I have another question after that.
Yeah. So one, great to meet you, Jonathan. I'm the chair of the Latino caucus in the legislature. So I would love to connect with you outside of this and figure out ways to support your work and the work of the chamber. So one, just great to meet you. On your question, the governor's proposed budget had, I think, several $1 million cut for our local community colleges. House Democrats restored that cut to make sure that we sustained funding levels because of what you just mentioned, the important work that our local community colleges are doing to not just get people 2-year degrees and up to 4-year institutions in our university system, but they're getting people right to work through a lot of trade programs as well. And so we made sure that we sustained their funding. I think one of the biggest things is making sure that folks know about these programs. And so I'm all ears on ways that we can meet people where they're at and make sure that they understand about these opportunities. Because once they get through the doors at PGCC, they're going to excel. They have a dedicated staff. I'm so, so, so grateful of our president at the university. She is kicking ass. When you look at the retention rate of students, when you look at the matriculation rate since she's been there, they are meeting the mark. And so I think making sure that we sustain the level of funding for our community colleges is really, really important. We sustain the Promise Scholarship, which is a scholarship that goes to low-income students to go to school for free. We made sure that those investments were still there. And so we are making sure that folks have the opportunities that exist. I see you put your information in the chat, and I will make sure to save it on my computer.
All right, thank you. And the other thing I did want to bring up is just a comment for in regards to you mentioned the revenue and everything. So thank you for answering that. As far as diversifying the revenue stream for the state, and we know how that affects downstream as far as the county and municipalities and so on. But I did want to mention that Mr. Barry, um, you did mention the issue of not being able to find employees that speak English, and just to kind of bring up what we have here in the county, close to a third of the population within Prince George's County is speak Spanish as a first language. Hispanic homeowners or residents and so on. So it's just kind of the reality of the situation, and just being aware of this is what we're working with. So let's make the best of it and connect the community. So those of us here the Hispanic Chamber of Commerce and just other organizations around the county, we definitely love to work with, with the community and connect and make sure that we all rise up together. Because that's we ain't got nothing but each other right now.
Yep.
We got to look at it like that, and we have to make sure that we look out for one another here in District 7. I'm in Coral Hills, so it's like it's very important for me to develop this area however I can and support, and however I can help the council member and the team, and obviously the delegate and the legislature. I'd love to do that, and that's all I got. Thank you.
Of course.
Oh, go ahead.
No, I just want to say community is so important right now. Jonathan, you hit it right, the nail on the head. We have each other. I uniquely sit at the intersection of being both Black and brown. And I can tell you there's so much more that connects us than divides us. The division is a distraction. And we got work to do. We got communities to keep whole. We got safety nets to make sure we are sewing the holes in and making sure that folks are protected. And so I'm really dedicated to doing that work and making sure that we're focused on our communities. We're focused on our kids. We're focused on all of us. Our school system, the reality is 46% of the students in our school system in PGCPS are Latino. Another 20% are African immigrant children. Over 60% of the kids in our school system come from an immigrant background or story. They are Marylanders, they are Prince Georgians, and they want opportunity, and we need them to be successful and provide pathways for them. One of the bills, and this is me going on a tangent as a politician, one of the bills that we passed this year to align ourselves with 30 other states that I'm really proud of is we're going to allow the GED test to be taken in Spanish. Right? That is going to change the game when it comes to pathways for opportunities. Maybe the folks that you see at these construction sites are going to go to PGCC and get an associate's and go to University of Maryland and start a business, right? Maybe they're going to start and then hire out in their communities because we're allowing people to take a test and a language so they can be successful, right? And so the work we do here is really important about how we can just create more pathways and get rid of the bureaucracy, get rid of some of the red tape, and just provide people that running start. And so we're doing all of those things in combination to the investments we have in the budget.
No, thank you for saying that. And Jonathan, thank you for naming that as well. As many of you know, with the last name Orieva, my dad is from Kenya. My mom is from Kansas. So definitely understand the intersections of different cultures, which honestly is what makes America amazing. What makes Prince George's County amazing place is that we have some of the largest population of immigrants here. And so it's a beautiful melting pot. And it's really about how we build those communities in a way that we can all succeed and flourish. So just thank you for naming that. Is there anyone else with their hand up before I move to the chat?
One more from Belinda.
Hey, Belinda.
Thank you. Finally, I'm muted. You know I hate being muted.
I know you hate. You probably was sitting there like,
When I
oh
see
my
that
goodness.
gentleman, I'm gonna slap him upside the head, y'all. Everybody gonna know that. But anyway, so Crystal, I just have two things: a statement for you and then something for Asante.
Yeah.
So I get it, you guys want to make money, but to be honest, with this cell phone tax, it's only gonna make people like me. I ain't gonna sugarcoat it, you guys. Go to Virginia, use my Virginia address, and buy my cell phones in Virginia. Same way people in Maryland go to Virginia, get them Virginia tags, and buy the Virginia. We're only hurting ourselves. We got to think of other ways. To me, if we think outside the box and you really want to make money, then charge for the towers. If you're using a tower in Maryland, then that makes more sense, because then even if somebody went to Virginia, if they're using a tower in Maryland, they still got to pay to get that good signal off the tower. But we got to really think outside the box, because people are smart. They're going to think of other ways to get their cell, even if they have to get it from California somewhere, so they don't have to pay that $250. The same way most people did when we got away with the paper plates, and they went across to Virginia to buy them little plastic plates, that they want. So we got to really think about what we're talking about doing. I even heard somebody say they want to put a tax on Coke. Well, guess what? Then I'm just going to go to Walmart in Virginia to get my Coke. So it just doesn't make sense when I can drive across the state to get these things because you want me to pay extra money in Maryland. So we got to really think outside the box and think of other ways to make money instead of us giving out money to Virginia, because that's what people are doing. They go to Virginia for everything because, because these things are not happening there. So that's the first thing. The second thing is, Ashanti, I just have a question, and I'm just wondering how the people in the delegation, you guys, we have a lot of boards and commission, and we were talking about making sure that people within our county are higher. How do we let Prince George's County residents know what positions are available, what they can do to be a part of boards, to be a part of commissions? Do we advertise them as delegates, as senators? Do we send them to our community members saying, hey, this board or this commission, we have this, sign up? Do we have enough Prince George's County being represented on state boards? I'm just curious.
No, that's a great question. And I'll be honest, I'm not even sure of all the vacancies. I'm not sure what all opportunities are available. I will tell you, though, I'm really proud that one of my constituents, Molly Byron, she's the new appointment secretary for the governor. And so I have a direct relationship where I can ask her those questions to make sure that we get that information out. Part of it is, too, a lot of the boards and commissions, it is an administrative function. So the governor's office is who makes those selections. But I know there have been a number of Prince Georgians placed on boards and commissions since this governor has taken office. But that doesn't mean we can't have more of us in spaces that matter. And so, however I can be helpful, if you want to connect, I'm all ears on doing that. I will say, on the point that was made around, everyone will go to Virginia. Luckily, we did do a fix on the tags. So, you cannot have paper tags from Virginia and ride around to Maryland for too long, because Virginia finally did a fix to work with us, because we have to think regionally. We do. We have to think about Pennsylvania. We have to think about Delaware. We got to think about West Virginia. We are surrounded by other states. We don't get to operate on an island. The reality, too, is that Virginia is going to look at a budget deficit themselves with the impacts of what this administration is doing and the reduction of federal workforce. They're going to have to come back. They're going to have to come back even now with their governor, even though they had a 54-day session. They have weirder sessions. They do 2 years instead of 4 years than us. Their governor's vetoing all their bills. And so I think they're going to come back and have some real tough conversations similar to us and look at how to increase revenues. The reality is we can't print our own money. And so I do think we have to get creative about how we go out for that money. For example, I had a bill this year, it's my second year bringing it, that would impose a tax on social media companies to pay for youth mental health services. We've got to figure out ways that we stop dipping in our pockets and go after the corporate purse in a way that's responsible. I'm not saying that they pay for everything, but they don't pay their fair share. And I think we all can agree to that. So since we can, let's figure out what that is. And I think part of what we did in this budget that House Democrats passed, we did have combined reporting, making sure that corporations were giving us every dime that they needed to because they're using our roads, our facilities, and our workforce. Making sure that if you make a certain amount of money on capital gains, that's outside of a regular income, we're going to tax it a little bit. We think the people who are making really good money here in our state deserve to pay a little bit more to make sure that their neighbor can do good as well. That's a value that we just have as House Democrats, and our budget is reflecting of that.
Thank you. And thank you for that question, Belinda. I echo your sentiments around the telecommunications tax. I voted no and will continue to vote no, as did Delegate Ashanti Martinez. So I do think that we have to think strategically about creating revenue that's not always overburdening some taxes or fees on residents. Especially when a lot of the issues that we're facing were created by a lot of people that sat in the seat I'm sitting in and Ashanti sat in years ago, by decisions that they made, especially here in Prince George's County. When we look at neighboring jurisdictions and how they invested in development instead of relying so much on being a bedroom community, we are just facing the issues around that currently. So we did see a question about if we had addressed the litter cleanup. We did talk about that a little bit in the budget presentation. So that is one of the things that the county, well, the acting county executive did cut in the budget is the litter program. So it is a top priority for me to see that fully funded. I also have some pending legislation that will hold a lot of these businesses accountable for doing their fair share. It would basically say after so many violations that it would automatically allow the county to impose a monthly cleanup for a minimum of a year at 100% cost of the business with a 10% administration cost, right? Because the idea is to find a balance of not punishing businesses that are doing the right thing. So we want it to be triggered by continuous violations. And then we also want to make sure it's just not a violation, because sometimes the violations are so low that they'll just pay them, right? And there's no real incentive to clean up their property. And so a violation triggering us to take on hiring the contractor or cleaning the property and to charge them and to to attach it to their taxes. So if they don't want to pay the traditional way, we still get the money on the back end, is a way to hopefully just be a deterrent from seeing constant litter and trash in our strip mall. So that is something that we are working on. Is there anyone else with their hand up before I move back to the chat?
Yeah, we have two. The first is Kelly.
Hi, Kelly. We might be having some technical difficulties with Kelly. Do you want to move on to the next speaker?
Yes, the next is Nicole.
Good evening, Councilmember Ojeda and Delegate Martinez. I was the one that raised the question about the litter, and I'm just really concerned because it just seems to take so long. There are, as someone who is a pedestrian, it's very frustrating that I will call 311 and say, hey, this co-op or apartment complex, they have bushes and trees that are growing that are impeding progress. They don't do anything about it. It takes like weeks or months before something happens. There's a down tree on the median that's on 28th Parkway. I called close to perhaps a month ago about that. It's still there. It's a down tree, and it's like that area is never cleaned up. And I think part of attracting more businesses, trying to position, right? The county is about it looking, regardless of where you go, Mitchellville's, Marlow Heights, District Heights, Temple, doesn't matter. It's clean, it's neat, it looks inviting. And right now, you only get that in pockets. And so I understand that you're working to get that back, but there are also parts of this that are belong to the state. And I think it would be really helpful if if our county delegation could give some pushback and challenge these state agencies. Why is it that when you come in and finally cut the knee-high grass on Branch Avenue, it's just left there? How much, like the whole process, I think it's very concerning and detrimental to the county. And then also, I just really hope that there's something, some impetus, something, if there's something that residents can do to say, hey, can we get a coalition, a working group, something between DCPS, workforce enforcement, workforce development, and the chambers of commerce. Like, what are the emerging industries, and how can we position our students, those high school, junior high school, yes, and even elementary school students, to be able to fill those positions, bring those industries in, to be able to stop us from being such a bedroom community. And then last but not least, can you please stop building all these townhomes? Can you please, can you please put a moratorium on it and focus on affordable as well as subsidized and market rates um, apartments for people? Because Not everyone wants to own, not everyone can afford to own a home. Yeah. So, what can we do to help push that, right? What
Yeah.
can we do to help you to push that?
No, just thank you for naming that. And um, I might try to do a development town hall just about all of the pending projects to update people across the district. I'm really excited that for the first time, I'm helping to shepherd some projects that are just that into District 7. So, for example, Southern Avenue that has had no development in over 2 decades. We're bringing a mixed-use development that is going to be housing. It has space for a grocery store, a daycare center, and it is mixed when it comes to income. I think it's really important that in each housing structure or multifamily housing structure is a mixture of incomes. So there's some at market rate, and then there's some set aside units that are affordable at different scales between like 60, 50, and 40% of AMI. I've also advocated for 2 projects that have set aside units for youth aging out of foster care system. So we are about to see a lot of new development come into District 7. They take sometimes years, so hopefully they'll be open while I'm still serving in this seat. But I echo that, right? And I'm really supportive of the trying to get the projects that are like the mixed development and apartments. So apartments and single family homes is also something I'm really advocating for, because a lot of families that grow cannot stay inside of like the beltway, because there's just not a lot of options for single family homes on the market. So definitely focusing on apartments as well as single family homes, to add to our infrastructure. Um, Delegate Ashanti Martinez, did you want to answer the question about the state roads?
Oh, absolutely. One, it's so great to have another fellow pedestrian on the call. I'm one of 2 legislators here in Maryland that are car free. So I definitely understand your pain points, Nicole. It is really frustrating trying to walk somewhere, get to your next connection or destination, and the sidewalk ends, or there's a bush that requires you to go walk in the median in the street. It's not safe. It shouldn't be that way. And it's a policy choice, right? We choose to invest how we choose to invest. And so the prior administration under Governor Hogan, you could see the disparities within the District 3 State Highway Administration maintenance budget. Montgomery County got a lot more maintenance dollars than Prince George's. And so when Governor Westmore came in, one of the things I was really proud of was working with then Delegate Nick Charles, who's now Senator Nick Charles, on making sure that State Highway met with the county regularly and discussed those investments. I get emails on a weekly basis on what investments are happening at State Highway, how they're showing up in the county, because we've made it a priority as a delegation. He was delegation chair at the time for the House, that this is unacceptable. Senator Charles still has those meetings, I think, on a quarterly basis now, if I'm not mistaken, with State Highway. And I would encourage you to meet or join those meetings. He has a great newsletter called the Charles Connector that highlights when those meetings are happening. Definitely make sure it's happened with him, because he brings State Highway to these meetings where the community can get updates, can hear directly from folks within the administration about where pain points and issues are, but also the progress that is being made on a lot of these requests. I used to be a constituent services aide at the council, so I know how frustrating it is to submit something and then watch it sit. And so it's one of those things where we need to make sure that there's accountability with our state and making sure that the dollars that we bring to Maryland come back to Prince George's County in what's it called in services. And so I stand wholeheartedly with you on that and making sure that we have just an equitable framework, particularly with our state highways. A lot of our county maneuvers through state highways, and it's the state's responsibility to make sure that not just cars are the predominant, mode of transportation. We've got to have a multimodal approach, making sure that if you're walking, you're biking, you're carpooling, you're on the bus, whatever you're using, you can get to point A to point B affordably and responsibly and safe. And so that should be the focus of our state highway, and that's something I continue to push. And so I'm glad that you're doing this advocacy as well, Nicole.
Thank you for that, Ashanti. Um, and I did see a question in the chat about the process. And I just specifically talking about DPI. And I just want to note that's a top priority for the council's new leadership, Chair Burrows and myself as the council vice chair. And we've had conversations with the presumptive new county executive, Aisha Braveboy, made her aware of our concerns and issues around agencies. And she's assured that there are definitely going to be some changes and overhauls to certain agencies like DPI. So I just want to say that that's a focus of the current leadership of the county, understanding how much it's cost us a lot. Like when I meet with businesses, it's the number one thing they say is that the process in DPI costs them so much money because of delays. We're talking about millions and millions of dollars. And we know it's true because we suffer the delays in our own construction and we're the county, right? Earlier, I talked about that 588-day delay for a school building that's costing us millions and millions of dollars. And so businesses aren't going to eat that kind of cost, right? And so fixing DPI is a crucial step to ensuring that we actually get business and industry in the county. So I just want to name that is a priority. I also
want to add,
yeah, go ahead.
just because it made me think we do so much here. We have over 1,500 bills that have been introduced this legislative session, more than any other. My colleagues have more than enough ideas. And one of the things that we worked on was creating a work group around standing when it comes to the development process. But also part of that work group that I was really happy we added was let's talk about DPI capacity. Do they have too many responsibilities? How are they actually working on the responsibilities that they have? Are they meeting goals? Are there delays that are structural or because of capacity? Like, what is it the issue is? Because we consistently hear in Annapolis as well that DPI is one of the biggest burdens for us to bring business. That shouldn't be the case. We shouldn't be our biggest roadblock. And so we did pass the bill out of the House. Hopefully the Senate passes it in the same posture, but we are looking at that as a state as well to assist the county because we no longer can be our biggest burden.
Exactly. And I'm so glad that you guys, because I did know you guys turned it into a work group. I didn't know DPI was part of it. So I'm really glad to hear it because I think too much we focus on like it's a zoning thing. But honestly, I rarely hear issues about the zoning process. I really hear more issues about the DPI process. So I'm really glad that's going to be included. I also saw a question about access to the free community college. So I know I will say this was a goal of my first year here when I was elected and we kind of had the People's Council agenda. One of the goals was to have free community college for our students here in Prince George's County. We weren't able to get that passed. They had estimated that it would cost about $4 million. We advocated it for the budget, but the county executive at that time, we weren't able to get it in. What Councilmember Burrows and myself, there's an impact grant specifically for MGM. So it's a pot of funding that they have to pay that can only go in the impact area, a 6-mile radius of MGM. A majority of that 6-mile radius is Councilmember Burrows. A small part of that is in District 7. That funding is used to pay for free community college for anyone, not just high school seniors, but anyone that wants to go back to school, take a few classes. If you live in the 6-mile radius, you can go to Prince George's County Community College for free. If someone needs to look at the map and information to know if they're eligible, please reach out to my office. We have both the links that we can send to you to let you know if you're eligible. And if you're a senior that's wanting to go back and get your education, there is a SAGE program, and that's free for our senior citizens here in Prince George's County. And it doesn't matter where you live for the SAGE program. We'll take maybe 1 or 2 more questions before we end. Is there anyone else with their hand raised?
Kelly still has her hand raised. Let's see if we can get her to unmute this time.
Okay.
Hi, can you hear me?
Yes.
Hi. Thank you both. Council Member Orietta, I heard someone ask in a previous meeting about and when was the last audit for the council? Do you know that? Do you have that information, or do you know how often that's done?
When you say, are you talking about the county or just the
I'm
council?
sorry, the county. Yes, the county.
Okay. Um, I'd have to check when you talk about audits of the full, but what I would say, every budget cycle, we have a audits in an I guess audits and investigation division that sits in the council, and they have a meeting every single year. And they have an in-depth meeting with every single agency and department and go over their budget changes. They ask them questions, and then there's a report. And so every budget cycle, um, when the so you'll be able to see it if you ever watch a committee hearing.
Mhm.
When they come to the committee, there'll be an attachment, and it'll also attach the policy, but they call it basically your budget. Budget. My brain is not getting me
Is
the
an
word.
analysis?
Thank you.
Gotcha.
Thank you. It will be attached for every single agency, and it's pretty in depth.
Okay.
And it's every year.
Okay. All right. Thank you.
You're welcome. Any other hands raised?
No hands raised.
Okay. I'll do one more look at the chat to see if there's anything that I've missed. Okay, not seeing anything major that I've missed in the chat. And if I did, I apologize. Please feel free to reach out to myself and Delegate Ashanti Martinez for any questions that we missed. So I just want to say this. We know that we have a long road ahead, right? Especially when it comes to the deficit that we're facing. So if we go back to that first slide, you guys saw the projection and where we're sitting projected, at least as of now, for 2030 is a $400 million deficit. So we have to be really serious about how we're going to change the revenue structure here in the county. One of the things that we're committed to the new leadership of the council, myself and Chair Burrows, is we're really focused on really evaluating all the possible revenue streams. I saw questions around development fees and waivers and where do they go. So being very mindful about when we allow waivers, when we don't, because when you have waivers, there's impacts of like not getting that money into public safety or the school waiver fee. Also working with the state around what fees are we allowed to have, right? So the state just recently granted us the ability to charge vacant property at 2.5% above the tax rate. That's going to be huge for us, right? Because we have all this vacant property. They have no incentive to do anything with their property. Now that we have power to actually hit them in their pockets and say, look, you're going to be charged more every single year that you sit on this vacant property unless you develop it, sell it, rehab it, lease it out to someone, right? And so we're really trying to think in different ways on how we create revenue streams. We also, on the county side, want to hear from you right now. We just got the budget as a council this month, and it's our time to now negotiate with the administration on the things we want to see. So please reach out to myself, or if you don't live in District 7, another council member to advocate for things that you think are important and need to be restored in the budget, like the litter program. As Delegate Ashanti mentioned, the budget there's a budget in the Senate side, House side, and then reconciliation. So there's opportunity to still talk to your delegation about issues that are important to you as well. And then I would say lastly, just making sure you stay engaged in the process, because a lot of times we get in these positions, myself and the delegate, we're elected and we're doing our best to figure out what are the priorities, what do you want us to focus on, but we don't know unless you come to the table. You know, we're going to do our best to hear you and to push what you want to make sure it's at the forefront, but we can only do it if you're engaged in the process. So those that are new, I have monthly roundtables every single month. I'm on Zoom for 2 hours, sometimes longer, talking about bills, policy, ideas, and even constituent issues that you have. So please join those conversations with me so I can help be a better advocate for you. Delegate Ashanti Martinez, any last words?
Absolutely. Well, one, I just want to congratulate you again for just being such an advocate for the community. And I'm just so excited to see what we're going to be able to do in partnership together. For those that don't know me or getting to know me, again, I'm Delegate Ashanti Martinez. I represent District 22 here in Prince George's County. That includes the communities and neighborhoods of Hyattsville, New Carrollton, Edmonston, University Park, Berwyn Heights, as well as Riverdale and Lanham. And so it's a northern part of the county. Really, 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 really honored to serve my neighbors in this capacity because it's no truer honor, I really feel like, than serving your neighbors. And so this legislative session, we've had a really tough budget session. We have real realities that we had to face, and we had to make hard choices. It was said on the floor today, it's really easy to criticize, but it's much harder to govern. And House Democrats have decided to do everything that we can to make the least impact for you at home. And I think our budget reflects that. We're not finished with our work. We still got 13 more days, but know that you can always reach out. I put my link to my website in the chat. That includes a link to the website for the General Assembly that has all the legislation that I've either sponsored or co-sponsored this session, as well as ways to contact me in my office. I don't do monthly meetings, but I do any meeting you request. So my Chief of Staff, Jacob, he's the keeper of the calendar. If you need any time from him, he's the one to give it to you. He'll be grateful to do so. And I'll end with this. I love each and every one of you. I hope you're taking care of yourselves and know that you always have an advocate and a fighter in your corner here in the Maryland General Assembly. And so whether it's these fights on the budget or future fights, know that we are always thinking about you because it's your money. It really comes down to that. And so I'm just really honored to do this work with Crystal. And I'm just really, really proud that we all were able to come together at a time like this to have such an important conversation. So thank you all for showing up.
Thank you again. And I would be remiss if I didn't say I'm so proud of our delegate, Ashanti Martinez. For you guys that don't know, he is my little brother at heart. And he served as my chief of staff and then left me to do great things in Annapolis. And I'm just so proud of your growth and so thankful that we have the opportunities to be colleagues in this work. And I'll also leave you guys with this. We're feeling it on the federal level in a way we've never felt it before. And so always remember, elections have consequences. And so we're living through it now. But I think we're going to make it. For me, I'm someone of faith. And so I know who always has the steering wheel. And so we might not see what's ahead of us, but I know it will be great. So thank you all for being with us here today. We appreciate you. And if you have any questions, always reach out. Thanks,
Please
everyone.
take care.